Hello, everyone tuning in right now at precisely 3:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on this particular afternoon, coming just a few short hours after Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney took the decisive step of terminating the long-standing Boundary Waters Treaty and assumed full control over critical water supplies upon which no fewer than 40 million Americans depend for their daily needs. On that very same day, when Canada revealed a $2 billion infrastructure package aimed at shifting worldwide trade routes beyond the United States in a significant way, Carney landed in Brussels for an urgent session of the North Atlantic Council, which serves as NATO's key governing body responsible for major policy directions. What took place in the course of that particular session, based on detailed accounts from several diplomats who attended the gathering and observed the proceedings firsthand, marks the most intense clash in NATO's 77-year existence, highlighting tensions that have been building beneath the surface for some time. Carney officially suggested that NATO overhaul its command framework in a comprehensive manner to establish shared top leadership between the United States and a European Canadian bloc, basically putting an end to U.S. supremacy and the organization that has defined its structure since the beginning. In Carney's plan, the role of Supreme Allied Commander Europe, known as CESUR, which an American general has occupied without interruption since NATO began operations, would switch every 3 years between U.S. and non-U.S. officers according to a clear alternating pattern. The NATO Secretary General position, now filled by a European official in line with long-standing tradition, would receive broader powers such as sole direction of alliance military assets in times of need. The biggest change of all, Carney called for Canada to take on a fresh role as Supreme Allied Commander North America, or CCNEA, with control over every NATO activity in the Western Hemisphere, including powers now held exclusively by U.S. Northern Command. This amounts to Canada insisting on par with the United States inside NATO in a way that challenges the established order. It's Canada directly confronting 77 years of American military preeminence in the Western Alliance, a dominance that has shaped collective defense strategies for generations. Diplomats who attended the meeting reported that 19 out of NATO's 32 countries, including France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and all the nations that backed Canada's Article 5 activation in recent developments, signaled their backing for Carney's idea with notable enthusiasm. Trump is outraged by these developments. NATO, the partnership the United States built and has guided since 1949, is gearing up to remove America's leading position in a move that carries profound implications. And Canada, the neighbor Trump attempted to pressure into compliance through various means, is spearheading the push with determination and clarity. I'm going to guide you through Carney's detailed suggestions for reorganizing NATO's command structure and explain how they would completely shift the power dynamics inside the alliance in a measurable way. I'll present the comments from European partners endorsing Canada's stance and their rationale for favoring major change, drawing directly from the accounts available. I'll disclose the Pentagon's swift response and why American military officials regard this as a fundamental danger to U.S. strategic standing. I'll clarify why 19 NATO countries are ready to endorse a reorganization that lessens U.S. sway. And I'll outline 3 possible futures for NATO should Carney's ideas be implemented, each one rooted in the current trajectory. Subscribe to become part of the community and share this video if it provided insight and value to your understanding of these fast-moving events. Let me take you step by step through Carney's official submission to the North Atlantic Council. Since every part is crafted to curb American solo authority while preserving the alliance's joint defense strength in a balanced manner, the proposal paper, acquired by various media outlets through diplomatic channels and reviewed carefully, outlined 7 primary changes that together form a cohesive vision for the future. First, rotating the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Right now, CESUR is invariably a U.S. 4-star general, directing all NATO forces across Europe with full operational oversight. Carney suggests CESUR alternate every 3 years between American and non-American leaders in a sequence like American-European, American-Canadian, and continuing onward, which ensures that America retains substantial input, but eliminates the possibility of permanent American oversight that has been in place historically. This adjustment would allow for fresh perspectives while maintaining continuity in command responsibilities. Second, establishing Supreme Allied Commander North America. Carney recommends setting up a brand new command role, SACNA, tasked with every NATO mission in the Western Hemisphere without exception. This role would always go to a Canadian officer and would oversee protection of North American land, collaboration with non NATO countries in the region, and long term planning against dangers from the Arctic or Pacific approaches. This stands out as the boldest element among the proposals since it deliberately pulls the Western Hemisphere out of default U.S. jurisdiction and assigns it to Canadian leadership in a structured and official capacity. Third, greater powers for the NATO Secretary General. At present, the Secretary General focuses mainly on political and diplomatic duties with restricted military reach that limits independent action. Carney wants the Secretary General to obtain standalone power to send NATO response forces into action, allocate alliance assets for urgent situations without requiring full member agreement every time, and speak for NATO in talks with outside countries when necessary. This builds a balance against Saussure and stops any one country from controlling alliance choices single-handedly, promoting more collective input overall. Fourth, forming a NATO Strategic Council. Carney suggests creating a group made up of delegates from the 5 biggest NATO economies measured by GDP: the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, and Canada. This council would handle pressing decisions about deployments, missions, and guidelines when the full North Atlantic Council can't reach quick agreement due to time constraints. Rulings would need 4 out of 5 votes, so the U.S. could lose 4-1 in certain cases. This blocks American go-it-alone moves while letting NATO decide swiftly and effectively in critical moments. Fifth, a standalone European Defense Command. Carney calls for officially recognizing European strategic independence by setting up a lasting European defense setup that could run NATO troops in Europe independently of American involvement when required by circumstances. This recognizes that European allies must be able to protect themselves if U.S. dependability falters, as shown during Trump's term through various actions that raised questions about commitment levels. Sixth, military links with the Democratic Trade Alliance. Carney proposes that NATO set up structured ways to coordinate with the Democratic Trade Alliance, allowing its 62 non-NATO members to join in alliance strategy and activities on a formal basis. This links NATO to the wider democratic community outside the alliance and narrows the gap between Atlantic and Pacific defense systems, creating smoother collaboration across regions. Seventh, updating the consensus rule. Carney suggests changing NATO's need for full agreement so major choices can advance with 75% backing instead of total unanimity in every instance. This stops any single country from halting progress while keeping a strong majority requirement for wide acceptance, ensuring decisions reflect broad consensus without paralysis. Subscribe immediately because what comes next is the discussion that took place in the North Atlantic Council session and the reasons 19 members backed Carney's suggestions with such conviction. Diplomatic accounts indicate Carney began by tackling the issue of American dependability in direct and measured language. He stated, NATO was established on the idea that democracies unite against dangers to liberty and independence. For 77 years, the United States guided this alliance because America was counted on to wield its strength responsibly and honor ally sovereignty. Recent events have shown that U.S. guidance can't be assumed anymore. The United States broke trade deals, endangered a NATO ally's independence, positioned forces along borders in intimidating ways, and disregarded its democratic processes when Congress acted to limit executive authority. Canada isn't pushing NATO to remove the United States. We're urging NATO to adjust to a situation where American guidance is uncertain rather than assured. Our suggested changes keep American input while guaranteeing the alliance operates even if America proves unreliable. These adjustments safeguard NATO's capacity to protect members no matter who holds the presidency. French President Emmanuel Macron joined next through video link from his location. Sources say Macron remarked, France has pushed for European strategic independence for years, exactly because we see that U.S. dedication to Europe might shift under certain conditions. President Trump's approach toward Canada confirms our worries were valid and timely. France endorses Canada's ideas without reservation. NATO has to change or it risks losing significance in the broader global landscape. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz spoke third in the sequence. Sources report Scholz said, Germany views the suggestions as fair and essential for the alliance's ongoing vitality. Rotating Saussure keeps American engagement while stopping American control from turning into American overreach in practice. Establishing SACNA recognizes Canada's valid security needs in North America that shouldn't be secondary to U.S. choices at all times. Germany backs these adjustments fully and sees them as constructive. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer spoke forth during the proceedings. Sources indicate Starmer said the United Kingdom prizes the transatlantic bond deeply, but that bond demands dependable allies across the Atlantic on a consistent basis. Canada's ideas reinforce the alliance by spreading authority more fairly among partners. The UK favors rotating SACEUR, setting up SACNA, and building systems that let NATO proceed when American policy lacks consistency in key areas. Polish President Andrzej Duda spoke fifth, voicing Eastern European views with careful consideration. Sources say Duda stated, Poland counts on NATO for its security, and NATO has long represented American strength for our protection from Russia. We're hesitant about anything that weakens U.S. dedication to our safety and principle. Still, we see that American dedication has already diminished due to President Trump's actions in recent weeks. If these changes guarantee NATO can shield us even when America is preoccupied or inconsistent, Poland is able to back them without hesitation. Sources note that 19 NATO members voiced approval for Carney's suggestions or showed willingness to discuss specifics in further detail. Backers included all key European countries, Canada, and various smaller ones tired of American preeminence over the years. Those against included the United States, Hungary, Turkey, and a handful of others who align politically with Trump or gain from the existing setup in its current form. Here's how the U.S. side reacted when it was their turn to respond. Sources say the American NATO representative presented a response clearly coordinated with the Pentagon and White House in advance. It declared, the United States firmly opposes Canada's suggestions in their current form. NATO thrives thanks to American guidance, American arms strength, and American dedication over decades. The alliance has worked for 77 years under American direction because America supplies most of NATO's fighting power, covers most defense expenses, and holds the broad outlook to guide effectively. Canada's idea to rotate SACEUR is unacceptable, since it would put alliance military efforts under leaders missing the assets, expertise, and worldwide view American generals provide on a consistent basis. Creating SACNA is, in our assessment, unnecessary. North American security is already handled well by U.S. Northern Command and NORAD. Adding a Canadian command layer would split command unity in ways that could cause issues. Empowering the Secretary General weakens America's ability to align NATO with U.S. strategic goals over the long term. At its core, Canada's suggestions aim to weaken American sway as payback for unrelated bilateral conflicts. This is Canada turning the alliance against the United States in an unprecedented manner. Should these ideas pass, the United States will have to rethink our NATO involvement seriously. That final warning of possible U.S. exit from NATO instantly alarmed multiple delegations in the room. Sources say NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stepped in promptly, noting, the United States brings legitimate points about preserving alliance strength and effectiveness, but Canada and its supporters also present legitimate issues about American consistency in recent times. I suggest the North Atlantic Council form a reform group to examine Canada's suggestions over the coming 90 days and propose solutions balancing both sides thoughtfully. This allows time to develop fixes that bolster rather than divide the alliance at this critical juncture. Sources indicate Carney accepted the 90-day group, but stressed Canada wants real changes, not superficial ones that fail to address core concerns. Carney reportedly commented that Canada will engage sincerely throughout the process, but he added clearly, NATO needs to evolve or Canada will seek other security arrangements that better fit the current realities. The Democratic Trade Alliance already has 62 countries as members. If NATO fails to adjust to a multipolar landscape unfolding around us, the DTA will emerge as the main security coordinator for democracies worldwide, and NATO will shrink into a regional Euro-American entity of fading importance. The decision rests with NATO as a whole. The session concluded with agreement to create the Reform Commission, yet no settlement on the core disagreement that had emerged. The United States seeks to hold dominance as before. Canada plus 19 others seek to share authority more evenly across the membership. The Commission will deliver its report in June 2026, but the political struggle will escalate well ahead of that deadline with ongoing discussions. Here's what occurred in Washington once news of the NATO session reached leaders through official channels. At 6 p.m., the Pentagon convened an urgent gathering of top military officials to assess the situation. Sources say the conversation centered on risks to U.S. command power and overall influence. The Joint Chiefs Chairman reportedly noted that rotating cesure would harm U.S. capacity to guide alliance military strategy and missions in practice, and that escalated under Canadian direction would eliminate automatic U.S. military control over Western Hemisphere security matters. The officers determined that Carney's suggestions, if enacted, would mark the largest drop in American military clout since World War II ended, representing a historic shift. At 6:30 p.m., Trump received a briefing on the NATO events from his advisors. Sources say Trump reacted with fury upon hearing the details. He reportedly declared Canada is attempting to seize NATO and that the U.S. ought to exit immediately instead of accepting lesser leadership in any form. Advisors allegedly tried to warn that leaving NATO would devastate U.S. security and cede worldwide influence to China over time. Trump reportedly dismissed that perspective, demanding the U.S. reject any changes cutting American authority outright. At 7 p.m., the White House released a statement outlining its position. Clearly, Canada's effort to reorganize NATO is shocking and intolerable to the United States. NATO remains an American-guided alliance meant to protect Western security through American leadership as its foundation. The United States refuses any changes that reduce our proper place as the alliance's head in the established order. If NATO countries back Canada's suggestions moving forward, the United States will exit the alliance and establish fresh security ties with countries that honor American leadership without question. At 7:30 p.m., congressional figures replied in swift fashion. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer stated, "President Trump's warning to leave NATO is irresponsible and hazardous to our national interests. Congress won't permit withdrawal under these conditions. We will enact laws barring the president from exiting NATO without congressional consent to ensure proper oversight." At 8 p.m., the Senate passed emergency legislation 94-6, mandating congressional approval for any NATO withdrawal attempt in the future. The House is set to vote the next day with comparable strong backing across party lines. At 8:30 p.m., Carney released a statement from Brussels addressing the developments directly. NATO stands at a crossroads at this moment. The alliance can adjust to a world where American leadership must be earned via consistency and ally respect on an ongoing basis, or it can stick to a framework rooted in American dominance that no longer matches current facts on the ground. Canada would rather see NATO choose adjustment and evolution. But if NATO opts for inertia and resistance to change, Canada and aligned nations will develop new structures suited to the times. The decision belongs to NATO as the collective body. Let me present 3 possible paths for NATO ahead, based on the current proposals and reactions. Scenario 1. Compromised adjustment through negotiation. The 90-day commission crafts balanced suggestions that extend cesure rotation timing to allow more preparation, set up SACNA with ties to U.S. Northern Command coordination requirements, and modestly boost Secretary General powers in targeted areas. The U.S. accepts these reluctantly after internal discussions. NATO persists, but with lessened American preeminence overall. Gradually, the alliance grows more even and more European-Canadian in character as responsibilities are shared. Scenario 2. Alliance division into parallel structures. The U.S. rejects all changes proposed. Canada, France, Germany, the UK, and 15 additional members create a separate democratic defense partnership that works with NATO on certain matters but functions independently elsewhere when needed. NATO remains in name, but weakens as key cooperation moves to the new group. Over time, the U.S. ends up with a smaller set of loyal partners in its remaining coalition. Scenario 3. U.S. exit effort leading to internal challenges. Trump directs NATO withdrawal through executive action. Congress stops it through legal means and oversight. The U.S. enters a constitutional standoff over executive power in relation to alliances. Amid the turmoil, NATO runs effectively without U.S. involvement for a period. Once resolved, NATO has adjusted to operate minus America, and U.S. sway shrinks permanently, not intentionally, but due to American internal chaos during the process. I'm following the Commission's work carefully as it proceeds, watching for more NATO countries to voice reform support in the coming weeks, and tracking any extra withdrawal warnings from Trump that might arise. Carney called for NATO leadership in clear terms. 19 nations favor reorganization of the command structure. The Pentagon perceives a core threat to long-standing U.S. positions, and the alliance America founded is set to lessen American control in meaningful ways. The 90-day timeline is running steadily. The fight over NATO's direction has started in earnest, and Canada is driving the challenge to 77 years of American dominance with resolve and strategic vision.